Now let's take a look at JFLAP, which is a fantastic tool to help us out with understanding DFAs and lots more. Okay, I'm going to use JFLAP to create this DFA. It's a DFA that accepts strings over the alphabet A, B that begin with 0 or more A's, followed by an odd number of B's. And here's a regular expression that represents that same DFA. So I'm going to double click on the JFLAP icon, and that popped up this window, and I'm going to select finite automaton because of course DFA stands for deterministic finite automaton, right? So it makes sense. The first thing I need to do in order to make that DFA is I need to place some states. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go over here to the state creator tool and click on that, and then I'm going to just use my left mouse button to click, and when I do that, so I'll click, I get Q0, click, I've got Q1. I'm going to add a few, let's see, I'll do a Q3. Oops, that was Q2, sorry. And I can actually make my states a little bit bigger if I want. I'm just going to slide this automaton size bar over, make sure that my state creator is still selected, and I'm going to make a Q3 and a Q4. We don't actually need all of that, but it'll let me demo a couple of other things. Now, of course, once I have a state, I need to pick a start state, and Q0 was going to be our start state, right? So I'm going to left click on the attribute editor tool here. And by the way, all of my clicks are going to be left clicks unless I tell you otherwise. There's a few things that I need to right click, and creating a start state is one of them. So I'm going to go to Q0 and right click, and that lets me select that this is going to be my initial state, my start state. And you can see we get the little triangle instead of the arrow we use in class, but the triangle is pretty good. I can go over to Q1 if I say, oops, I didn't want Q0 to be my initial state. I wanted Q1 to be my initial state. If I right click on Q1, I can pick initial state, and since we can only have one initial state, Q1 snags it. I'm going to go back and make Q2 by right clicking and then selecting initial. Q0, sorry, Q0 is back to being my initial state. Now, one of the transitions that we had in that diagram, here I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. One of the transitions that we had in that diagram was a B going from Q1 to Q2. Here, let's see if I can show you that diagram again. There you go. So loops are a little bit different. So we'll start with this transition, the B from Q1 to Q2, and then another B back from Q2 to Q1. So let's do a transition from Q1 to Q2 that has a B on it. So I'm going to click on my transition creator tool, and I'm just going to use my left mouse button. I click, and then I drag and let go. And it shows me this little box into which I type what I want my transition to be, in this case, B. And I can do the same thing again from Q2 to Q1, and I can make that a B. And it does a nice job of sort of rounding these things out. Of course, I wanted Q1 to be an accept state, right? Q1 to be a final state. So I can go back into my attribute editor, and I can right click on Q1 and make that a final state. Just so that this ends up the way my picture did, I'm going to throw Q3 down here, and Q4 is going to be sort of an extra state that we'll just use for fun. I think I already showed you already, but if I'm in the attribute editor mode, if this arrow is selected, I can move my states around, and it's actually nice. My transitions stay stuck. Okay, the next thing that we needed was an A transition from Q0 to itself, right? We need a loop, a self loop. And you saw that if I'm in transition creator mode, I can do a transition by clicking and dragging with the left button. So like I need another B from Q0 to Q1. So if I click and then let go and type the letter B and hit enter, there's my B. And you don't actually have to hit enter. So if I like want to have a transition from Q1 to Q4 that has a C on it, I can also just click outside somewhere and that C gets in there. We'll leave that for now. I'm going to show you how to delete transitions and states a little bit later, so we'll leave that in there for the moment. But what I was trying to do was make this loop on Q0. And remember, to make a transition, you drag from where you want to start the arrow to where you want it to end. In this case, I just want it to start and end at Q0. So if I just click on Q0 while I'm in this transition creator mode, so I'm just going to do a click, and it immediately asks me, what do you want for your loop? I'm going to label this one an A. So now I have as many A's as I want, followed by a B, and then as many B's as I want, as long as I have an even number, right? So let's see, what else did I want to show you? Let's just look at Q4 for a minute. I've got this C transition. Now, one of the things that we do in class that we don't do, that we do because our textbook, Hein, does this, but it's a little bit messy in JFLAP, is let's suppose I want to have a transition from Q1 to Q3. Actually, I want to have two transitions, one for A and one for B. And we often will use a shorthand in class that has A comma B here. But in JFLAP, we can't do that. In JFLAP, JFLAP's smart in that if I say, ooh, let me do another transition from Q1 to Q2. This time I want to do a transition with an A on it. It kind of stacks the transitions. And so you'll see this is A comma B. That's a little bit different than this AB. And if I drag another transition over here and I say, okay, now I want a B, you'll see it doesn't do anything because it knows B is already in there. On the other hand, if I'm going from Q1 to Q3 and I drag and I say, now give me an A, you'd think it would say, oh, A is already in there because of that A comma B. But when I hit enter, no, let's pull this, oops, let me go into, come on, the attribute editor mode so I can pull this down a little bit. And you can see that A is different from A comma B. And so what we can do is we can delete things that we don't like. So if I have a transition that I want to get rid of, there's a couple of things I can do. Let me just add one more transition onto this Q1 to Q3 state. So I'm going to drag from Q1 to Q3. Let's make it a C also. Not that we really want to keep a C, but it's fine. And let's drag, oops, maybe if I go up here, I selected the attribute editor, just move Q2 up a bit so that those don't bang into each other. I can delete a state if I want. I go on to this tool here, the deleter tool. Sorry, not a state. I can delete a state, but for example, if I delete Q4, boom, Q4 is gone. I just went over there and clicked with my left mouse button on the state. I can also delete a transition if I want to get rid of that A. I can just click on the A. I can also click somewhere on the arrow, and that gets rid of whatever transition was closest to the arrow. If I want to get rid of the last one, let's just get rid of that. And let's see, what else might you want to know in terms of creating these things? You can make a new transition. Well, actually, let's finish this off first, right? So the difference between this not quite DFA and the DFA that I showed you earlier is, of course, it's not a DFA according to Hein unless you have an out transition for each letter of the alphabet. And if we ignore the fact that I was playing with C's for a little bit ago, and just say this is over the alphabet AB, that C was just a mistake, then Q0 has A out and B out. Q1, well, I guess we don't want that A there for now, right? So I just clicked on it. Let's go back here. So Q1 has a B out now, but no A out. So we need to get the transition tool and just do a transition from Q1 to Q3, and we'll call that A. And another transition from Q2 to Q3 that's also A, right? So I dragged and then unclicked on Q3, and I'm going to just hit A and enter. And, you know, I feel like having some curvy transitions, so I'm going to click back on the attribute editor, and if I click on an arrow on a transition, I can grab this little circle here and make it a little bit more loopy. And then I need to click somewhere. Oh, I think I actually need to click on the transition. There you go. And that makes it a nice rounded transition if I'm feeling like I want transitions. I still don't have a DFA yet, right? Because Q3 doesn't have any out arrows, any out transitions. So I need to go to the transition tool again. And I need to have a loop on Q3 that gives me that goes out on an A. And then I would like to write A comma B here, but it's really important that I do it separately. So I'm going to do an A, and then I will click again and type B. So I have a loop for A and B. And let's just, let me go into attribute editor mode again so that I can drag these guys up a little bit, just so that when I'm looking at it, my, what if I do that? There we go. Isn't that nice? Let's make this a little bit smaller. I can read all the letters and see which letter goes with which transition. That's really very important and very useful. Last thing I want to show you in here, let me shrink this down a little bit. You know, Q3 here is a trash state or a trap state or Hotel California state. You can get in, but you can't get out. Right? As soon as you get into Q3, you're stuck. You can never leave. And maybe I want to sort of label that state, right? Maybe I want to change the label. I can change the label so that I can change the name of it from Q3 to something else. I can just right click on here and set the name. So I could say, oh, instead of Q3, let's call this one, well, I could call it trash. That's a little bit weird. These are Q0, Q1, Q2. So I'm going to right click on it again, and I'll set the name. Let's call this one, let's set it back to Q3. And I'm going to click outside so that I unhighlight Q3. But what I would like to do actually is I would like to kind of put a label on here that I can view when I'm interested, but I don't have to look at all the time. So I'm going to right click again, and I can say change label. And I'll call this my trash or trap state. And it shows me this label, and I can right click anywhere in the white area is what I did. So it was a right mouse click out here, and there's this option display state labels, so I can hide it, or I can right click again and say display state labels and click, and it's back. And so it's useful. State labels can be kind of like comments in your code, right? They're very useful. So Q1, it's important to notice that when you get to Q1, you always have an odd number of B's, right? It's my except state. I better have an odd number of B's. I can right click on here, and I'll change the label, and I'm going to call this odd number of B's. And of course, I'll call Q2. Let's change the label, and we'll call that even number of B's. And yeah, I don't think I really need a label on that Q0 right now. So I am going to save my my new JFLAP file so that I could open it later. I'll go into my JFLAP diagrams, and I'm going to call this, well, I actually did this before, right? So I'll call this, I don't know, demo video diagram, and I will, hit save. And now I can open this up later if I want. Okay, so it's great that you can draw a a DFA, and in fact I'm going to stop displaying the state labels. But being able to draw a nice DFA is nice if you want to turn in a homework or something, but the cool thing starts when you actually discover that JFLAP lets you do things like test a string and see if it gets accepted by the DFA. So the first way we're going to do that is doing a step through of a string. So you can go to the input menu and you can say step by state. And you can type some input. So you could type, like, let's try AABBB. And you can say click to open input file. Oops, I don't want input file. Sorry, I'll show you that later. And say OK. And now you get something that's very similar to a debugger. And in fact, in this second window that I've got the labels pop up, I'm going to just right click and hide the state labels right now. But so what you can do is you can step through just like you're in a debugger. So we start, and the system has bolded. I don't know how easily you can see this, but these letters are all bolded, all the letters, and that means we haven't been anywhere yet. We haven't processed any of these letters in our string, and we're at state Q0. And now you can say step, and after a step, we are still at Q0, right? We process that first A, and if you look in here, I don't know if you can see, but the first A is sort of grayed out, and the rest of the string is darker. We can step again, and of course we looped back to Q0 again. Now we have a B as the next letter to process, so we should go over to Q1, and if I step, look, it says we're at Q1. We have another B, and now we're at Q2, and we have our final B, and we go back to Q1, and the screen turns green. Woohoo, we win, right? And another thing you can do is you can say, well, let me see a trace of that. So you stick in your big long string. Oops. I said trace, and it says select at least one configuration. This is actually really good to show you. Maybe it was by design. What you need to do is you actually need to click on this string here, and now I can say trace, and a window popped up out of your view, but here it is. And that shows you, can I show you this so that you can see stuff somehow? That shows you that we started with this string and all the letters are bold, and we were at Q0, and then we processed the first A and we're at Q0, and we processed the second A, we're at Q0, and so on. So it gives you sort of a step through this whole process. So let's close that for a minute. And as you saw a minute ago, you can also trace a string that you have in a text file. So here I have a text file called alternate text file.txt that has, oh, that's a little bit annoying. I don't want the same file string. Let's try just the BBB. And let me move these guys to the bottom of the file. And I'm going to save this file. And what if I go to the file menu here and, oops, sorry, the input menu, and I say step by state. Remember, right now we're doing step by state. You can click to open an input file, and I'm going to go into my alternate text file. And what it does is it takes whatever the first string was that was in your file list, and it will let you step through that. So I can click on this now, and I can say trace, and it will give me, whoa, my trace is pretty crummy. I guess what I have to do is before I do the trace, I need to step through it at least once. So let's step and step again and step again, and look, we win. And now if I say trace, oops, it says select at least one configuration. I click on the on this window and I say trace, and now it actually shows me the whole trace, right? So that's good. And then of course I have a couple, you can see I have the editor where I can change my DFA, but while I'm in simulate mode, it's not going to let me switch to the editor tab because you don't want to be able to change your DFA while you're in the middle of these simulations. So you do need to close out both of these tabs to do this. What was I going to show you? Oh, let me just show you real quick what happens if you run a test on a, if you do step by state and we do input on a string that's not in the language. So like, how's about the string with 5 A's, right? I'll say okay, and if I step through this, you can see I process each of the A's, and it's finished processing the string. I actually need to, for sort of technical reasons that we'll understand better when we learn about NFAs coming up soon, I have to hit the step button one more time, and then we get this red screen here saying, nope, there's no way for me to get that. And if I close this out and close this one, I'm back in the editor and I can change things around if I want. I can add new states and new transitions or